The cruiser pulled across the entrance to the parking garage at 2:38 p.m. on a Tuesday, cutting off a dark gray 2022 Cadillac Escalade ESV that had been waiting to exit since 2:34 p.m., and Officer Dale Whitmore got out and walked to the driver's window with the particular pace of a man who had already decided that the pace itself was a statement. The Escalade had a government plate. It had tinted windows. It had a small antenna mounted near the rear windshield that Officer Whitmore had not noticed or had noticed and chosen not to think about. It had been parked in the second-level visitor section of the garage attached to the Four Seasons Hotel on 14th Street NW in Washington, D.C. since 10:51 a.m. that morning. It had been there for 3 hours and 43 minutes. Officer Whitmore tapped the glass with one knuckle. The window came down. The man driving was 54 years old, wearing a white dress shirt with the top button open and the collar of a tie loosened to the second button. The tie itself, dark navy, small gold diamond pattern, pulled 4 inches below its correct position in the way of a man who had been in a formal meeting for 3.5 hours and had made exactly one concession to comfort on the way out. He had a phone in his right hand, an earpiece in his left ear, and the composed expression of someone in the middle of a conversation that had been paused but not ended. Officer Whitmore said he was going to need him to step out of the vehicle. The man on the phone said, into the earpiece, "Hold on one moment." He looked at Officer Whitmore. He said, "What is the nature of the stop?" Whitmore said there had been a complaint about a vehicle blocking the hotel service road. The man said the vehicle had been parked in the designated visitor section on level 2 since 10:51 a.m. and had not moved since, and asked how a stationary vehicle on level 2 could be blocking a service road. Whitmore said he was going to need him to step out of the vehicle. The man said, "Before I do that, I want to understand the basis of the stop." Whitmore said the basis was that he had asked him to step out. There was a pause. Through the open window, the sound of the garage, the low hum of ventilation, the distant mechanical sound of the elevator, the idle of Whitmore's cruiser blocking the exit lane 2 cars behind, settled around the exchange like something that had been waiting there already. The man in the white shirt looked at Whitmore for 3 seconds. Then he set the phone face down on the center console and reached to his left, into the inner pocket of the dark jacket that was folded on the passenger seat, and removed a credential case. Black leather, rectangular, with a seal embossed on the cover that Whitmore had not seen before on a credential case in 8 years of duty. He held it out and opened it. Officer Whitmore looked at the credential. He looked at the seal on the inside cover. He looked at the name beneath the seal. He looked at the photograph on the right side of the case. He looked back at the man in the white shirt. The man in the white shirt looked back at him. In the 3 seconds of silence that followed, Officer Whitmore's hand, which had been resting on the top of the open window frame, moved to his side. His weight shifted from his front foot to both feet. His jaw did not change. It was not the kind of jaw that showed things quickly, but something around his eyes rearranged itself into the expression of a man who had walked into a room and found that the room was considerably larger than the door had suggested. The credential read, "United States Government, Chief of Staff to the President, Executive Office of the President, the White House." Whitmore closed the credential case and handed it back. He did not step back. He said, "Sir, I'm still going to need you to exit the vehicle. There are people who understand the credential and step back, and there are people who understand the credential and feel the need to reestablish something before they step back." And Whitmore was the second kind. He had been the second kind in 8 years of duty, and it had served him, and it had not served him in roughly equal measure, but he had not yet found a way to distinguish in advance which situations would fall into which category. Achebe Nwosu did not get out of the car. He looked at the credential case in his hand, and then he put it back in the pocket of the dark jacket on the passenger seat. He looked back at Whitmore. He said, "On what grounds?" Whitmore said the complaint had not been resolved. Achebe Nwosu said, "The complaint was that an oversized vehicle was obstructing movement on level 2. I am in Space 7. I have shown you my identification. The vehicle has not moved in 3 hours and 43 minutes, and it is not going to move for approximately 4 more minutes, at which point I am going to drive it out of this garage and onto 14th Street. What is the unresolved component of the complaint?" Whitmore said he would need to call it in. Achebe Nwosu said, "Please do." He picked up his phone from the center console. He looked at the time. He set the phone back down. He waited. The ventilation system hummed. The elevator on level 3 made it sound. Patricia in the red Honda Civic was now on her phone, and from the quality of her posture, it was not a casual call. Whitmore stood at the window for 41 seconds. Then he walked back to his cruiser. The radio crackled twice. Something was said. Whitmore's hand went to the radio, and something was said in return. The exchange lasted 63 seconds. Then the two things happened at 2:43 p.m. If you already feel where this is going, stay with me. Because the credential is not the story. The credential is the door. What is behind the door is who this man was before he was the chief of staff, and why he was at this hotel on this Tuesday, and what the parking garage on 14th Street NW was the last stop before. His name was Dubem Achebe Nwosu. He was 54 years old and 192 pounds, and he had been born in Enugu, in the southeastern part of Nigeria, in 1970, the second of 6 children of Mrs. Chidinma Achebe Nwosu, who was a nurse, and Mr. Tobena Achebe Nwosu, who was an engineer and who had brought the family to the United States in 1979 to a 2-bedroom apartment in the Bronzeville neighborhood of Chicago on East 47th Street, where the rent was $310 a month and where the landlord collected on the first and last of the month, and where Dubem had shared a room with his brother until his brother left for college in 1987, and after that had slept in the room alone for 1 year before leaving himself. He had arrived at the University of Chicago in 1988 with $340 in savings, a partial merit scholarship, and a set of 3 things his mother had told him on the morning he left: to eat breakfast before anything else, to call her on Sundays, and to remember that the point of the education was not to impress the people who already had power, but to become fluent enough in its language to make it do something useful. He had written these 3 things in the back cover of the first notebook he bought. The notebook was still in a box in the storage unit in Silver Spring. The box was labeled Chicago. He had spent 31 years in government at the state level in Illinois, at the federal level in the Office of Management and Budget, in 3 cabinet agencies over 2 administrations, and for the past 22 months as the chief of staff at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. He had, in those 22 months, managed 427 senior staff, overseen the operations of 11 executive departments, attended 1,847 briefings, and been in the West Wing on 312 of the past 322 weekdays. He had not been in the visitor section of a parking garage on 14th Street NW for reasons that had anything to do with tourism. The parking garage attached to the Four Seasons on 14th Street NW was managed on weekday afternoons by a 3-person valet team and a contracted security company, whose responsibilities included access control for the loading dock on the east side and foot traffic monitoring in the lobby corridor. The valet station was at the garage entrance, ground level, staffed in the afternoon by a young man who had started 6 weeks prior, and who had been told, in his orientation, to call security if anything looked unusual, and to use his judgment about what unusual meant. His judgment had, at 2:36 p.m. on a Tuesday, landed on a dark-colored Escalade with government plates and tinted windows that had been in Space 7 since before his shift started. The vehicle had not moved. The driver had not come out. He had watched it for 22 minutes and it had continued to not move, and he had picked up the phone because not moving for a long time felt, to his 6-week-old professional judgment, like the kind of thing that might be unusual, and he had called the number he had been given and described what he saw, and the person who took the description had asked him for his name and his location, and the license plate, and he had provided all 3, and the call had been logged as a complaint, and the complaint had generated a dispatch, and the dispatch had generated Officer Whitmore. He had not known the vehicle was a government vehicle. He had not known what government plates looked like. He had not been told in his orientation what government plates looked like, because his orientation had been 3 hours on a Tuesday morning and had covered the valet key system, the tipping policy, and where to park luxury vehicles so they would not get door dinged, and had not covered credential recognition or federal vehicle identification, or the verification protocol for security complaint calls. because the orientation had been designed by someone who had not anticipated a situation like this, and who would, after the incident, review the orientation materials and add 2 pages. He had been at the Four Seasons since 10:51 a.m. for a private meeting with 3 members of the Senate Finance Committee, a meeting that had been scheduled and canceled 4 times in the preceding 6 weeks, and that had been rescheduled for a neutral location specifically because neutral locations made people say things in conference rooms they would not say in committee rooms. The meeting had ended at 2:31 p.m. His next obligation was at 3:45 p.m. at the West Wing. The drive was 11 minutes. He had been sitting in the Escalade for 4 minutes, finishing the call that Officer Whitmore's approach had interrupted, when the cruiser had pulled across the exit. He looked at Officer Whitmore. "Officer," he said quietly, "I need to be at the White House in 63 minutes. I'm going to ask you one question and I would like a direct answer. Has the hotel filed a complaint about this vehicle, yes or no?" Whitmore said he had received a call. "About this vehicle specifically?" "Level 2, visitor section, government plate." Whitmore said there had been a report of an oversized vehicle obstructing movement on Level 2. Achebe Nwosu said, "The visitor section on Level 2 has 14 spaces. 11 of them are empty at this moment. I am in space 7. The vehicle to my left has been there since before I arrived. No one has needed to move around me at any point in the last 3 hours and 43 minutes. What I am asking you is whether there is an actual complaint about this actual vehicle from an actual person at this hotel, or whether someone saw a government plate and a tinted window and made a different kind of call." Whitmore did not answer. The garage hummed. Somewhere above them on Level 3, a car started and pulled out of a space. The sound of its tires on the concrete descended through the levels like something looking for a way out. A third vehicle had queued behind Whitmore's cruiser in the exit lane. A fourth was now behind the third. A woman in the fourth car, a red Honda Civic, had her window down and was looking toward the front of the queue with the expression of someone who had been in this lane long enough to have opinions about it. Her name was Patricia. She was 47 years old, a dental hygienist from Bethesda, who had dropped her daughter at Union Station and was trying to make it back to Maryland for a 3 p.m. appointment, and who had no idea what was happening at the front of the lane, but who would, that evening, tell her husband that something had happened in a parking garage on 14th that she could not explain, but that had felt, from where she was sitting, like watching a very small fire decide whether it was going to become a larger one. 2 things happened at 2:43 p.m., within 30 seconds of each other. The first was that Whitmore's radio crackled with a voice from dispatch that said the complainant at the Four Seasons had been identified as a contract valet employee who had called in the obstruction report without clearing it with the hotel duty manager. The hotel duty manager, when contacted by dispatch, had stated that she had no knowledge of the complaint, that the vehicle in question was a registered government vehicle in a designated visitor space, and that she was, at that moment, extremely interested in learning more about the situation. The second was that the rear passenger door of the Escalade opened. The man who got out was not the driver. He was 38 years old, in a dark suit, with the look and the posture of someone who stood very close to significant things for a living and had learned to stand in a way that communicated that they were not the significant thing but were prepared to become relevant if necessary. His name was Agent Kelechi Nwosu of the United States Secret Service. He had been in the rear seat of the Escalade since 10:47 a.m. He had watched the entire exchange through the window without moving. He had now moved. He came around the front of the Escalade to where Officer Whitmore was standing. He was not fast. He was not slow. He had the specific walk of someone who had long ago stopped confusing speed with authority. He showed Whitmore his credential. Whitmore looked at it. Agent Nwosu said, "The vehicle is authorized. The occupant is cleared. The stop is concluded." He said this without looking at Achebe Nwosu, the way a person says something true that has been true for some time, and does not require consultation to confirm. Whitmore looked at the credential. He looked at the Escalade. He looked at the 4 vehicles now stacked in the exit lane behind his cruiser, including Patricia's red Honda Civic, including a black Mercedes belonging to a lobbyist who had a 3 p.m., and who had been on his phone for the last 7 minutes and whose patience was entirely exhausted. He looked at his cruiser. He walked back to his cruiser. He moved it. Achebe Nwosu watched the cruiser move out of the exit lane and into a visitor space along the garage wall. He watched it settle there with the engine running. He sat in the Escalade for 45 seconds without starting the engine. Then he picked up his phone from the center console and typed a message. He sent it to a woman named Deputy Chief Constance Bright Mensah of the Metropolitan Police Department's Internal Affairs Division, whom he had worked with in 2019 on a federal oversight review of traffic stop protocols in majority-minority districts. The message was 4 sentences. The first sentence was a description of the stop, the time, the location, and the badge number he had memorized from Whitmore's uniform in the first 10 seconds of the encounter. The second sentence was a question about the complaint origination protocols for private venue security calls. The third sentence was, "I would like to know whether this stop was consistent with MPD policy, and if not, what the corrective mechanism looks like." The fourth sentence was, "I will follow up by phone Thursday. I have time at 8:15. He started the Escalade. He pulled out of Space 7. He drove up the ramp to the exit and out onto 14th Street NW and turned toward Pennsylvania Avenue. He arrived at the West Wing at 2:56 p.m., 49 minutes before his 3:45 obligation, which was 49 minutes more than he had in most of his days. And he used 14 of them to write a more complete account of the garage incident in a memo that he saved to the secure drive under the folder labeled External Contacts. MPD Follow-Up. Deputy Chief Bright Mensah called on Thursday at 8:17 a.m. She asked him 3 questions, and he answered all 3. She told him that the complaint origination in cases of private venue security calls was supposed to require verification from a named hotel employee with supervisory authority before dispatch would generate a stop, and that based on the description of the incident, that step had not been completed. She told him she would review the dispatch record and Whitmore's body camera footage and have a preliminary finding within 10 days. The preliminary finding took 8 days. It concluded that Officer Whitmore had responded to an unverified complaint that did not meet the department's threshold for a vehicle stop, that the stop had been conducted without a stated legal basis, and that the officer had escalated to a request for the occupant to exit the vehicle before establishing probable cause. The finding recommended mandatory retraining in the department's vehicle stop protocols and a supervisory review of Whitmore's stops over the preceding 18 months. The supervisory review took 6 weeks. It identified 9 stops in the preceding 18 months that had originated from unverified third-party complaints. Of the 9, 7 had involved Black or Latino drivers. Of the 7, none had resulted in citations. All 7 had involved a request to exit the vehicle. The review panel described this pattern in its report using the word pattern, which was a specific word choice that the panel's chair, Deputy Chief Bright Mensah, had insisted upon over the objection of 2 members who had preferred the word occurrence. Officer Whitmore completed the retraining program in March. He was not dismissed. He was assigned a supervising officer for a probationary period of 90 days, with monthly review. In the final review, his supervising officer noted that Whitmore had demonstrated, in his words, an improved understanding of the threshold standard for third-party complaint stops, and that he had asked, on 2 occasions in the probationary period, for supervisor guidance before acting on complaint calls that did not meet verification requirements. This was noted as progress. The supervising officer also noted that the 2 occasions were the only times in the 90-day period when Whitmore had encountered a black male driver on a complaint call, and that this correlation was not addressed in the review. The supervising officer added this observation to the report in the final paragraph as a flag for the next review period. The valet employee who had made the original call was 22 years old, 6 weeks on the job, and had told his supervisor afterward that he had called because the vehicle was too large for the space, which was not true. Space 7 in the visitor section had a posted dimension of 9.5 by 20 feet, and the Escalade ESV measured 8.9 by 18.7 feet, and then, when shown the measurements, had said that he had called because the vehicle had been there a long time, which was within the posted visitor limit of 4 hours. And the vehicle had still been there for 3 hours and 43 minutes at the time of the call. The hotel duty manager, who had a conversation with the valet employee the day after the incident that lasted 11 minutes, did not share the contents of that conversation. She said only that the employee had been made aware of the verification protocol for service complaints and that she considered the matter addressed. The valet employee's name was not included in any of the formal reviews. Achebe Nwosu was at his desk in the West Wing at 8:46 a.m. on the Thursday of the follow-up call with Deputy Chief Bright Mensah. His desk had 17 items on it, arranged in a system that had not changed in 22 months. The item nearest the left corner was a small framed photograph of his mother, taken in 1994 at his law school graduation, wearing a purple dress she had bought on Maxwell Street in Chicago for $18, and that she had worn to every graduation and every swearing-in, and every occasion that deserved a purple dress for the rest of her life. Behind her in the photograph was the door of the law school, and above her head, barely visible, the edge of a banner that read, "Congratulations, class." She was looking at the camera the way she always looked at cameras, directly, without performing anything, with the expression of a woman who had brought 6 children from Enugu to East 47th Street and had not run out of things to do. He looked at the photograph after he hung up with Deputy Chief Bright Mensah. He thought about a parking garage and a tinted window and a government plate, and a man who had looked at him through glass and reached for the door before the question had been asked. He thought about the 9 stops and the 7 drivers and the word pattern. He thought about what his mother had told him the morning he left for Chicago, not to impress the people who already had power, but to become fluent enough in its language to make it do something useful. He had sent one message and made one phone call. The message had 4 sentences. The call had lasted 11 minutes. The review had taken 8 days, and the supervisory audit 6 weeks, and at the end of those 6 weeks, the word pattern was in a document that would be read by people who had the authority to do something with it, and the protocol had been amended to require supervisor verification for all third-party complaint stops at private commercial venues. And Whitmore was on a 90-day supervision with a supervisor, who wrote observations in the final paragraph rather than leaving them out. That was what the language of power, used correctly, could do. Not spectacle, not confrontation. 4 sentences. A Thursday morning at 8:15, what Officer Whitmore saw at 2:38 p.m. was a dark gray Escalade with government plates and tinted windows blocking his exit lane, and a complaint on his radio, and a man in a white shirt who asked questions before he got out of the car. What he could not see was East 47th Street and $310 rent, and the back cover of a notebook labeled Chicago, and 31 years in the language of a government that was not always fluent in the language of the people it governed. What he could not see was that the man in Space 7 had spent 3 decades becoming useful in rooms where most people who looked like him had not been allowed to stand, and that being stopped in a parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon was not a surprise to him, and that his response to it was not anger or theater but a message. 4 sentences, sent on the way out of a building he still had 49 minutes to reach. Some people move through rooms that were not designed for them so quietly that the rooms do not notice they have been entered. They sit in Space 7 and answer the questions and show the credential and drive to the next meeting and make the call on Thursday and trust the review to hold the pattern up to the light where someone with the authority and the will to see it can decide what to do next. They do not perform their power. They practice it, and the practice is quieter and more lasting than any confrontation that would have satisfied a different kind of story. The ones who have learned to move through resistance without becoming it are often the ones who move the furthest. And the furthest is not always visible. Sometimes it is a 90-day probation. Sometimes it is a word in a final paragraph. Sometimes it is one protocol, amended, that changes what the next officer does when the next complaint comes in from a parking garage at 2:38 on a Tuesday. That is what the language was for. Subscribe for more stories about hidden strength, quiet power, and the people the world overlooks until they change everything. Here is the question I want to leave you with. When Achebe Nwosu sat in the Escalade for 45 seconds before driving away, 45 seconds after the cruiser moved, after it was over, after he could have just left, what do you think he was deciding? And whatever he was deciding, do you think you would have decided the same thing? Leave your answer in the comments. I want to read it. I'll see you in the next one.